The galaxy had moved on. Centuries had passed since the last of humanity's ships left the stars, never to return. The stories of their grand civilizations were nothing more than legends told by alien races who had never truly understood the depth of human power. To them, humanity was a species that had burned bright for a short time before fading into obscurity. The great cities, once teeming with life, were now nothing more than ruins scattered across distant planets. Their technology, so advanced in its prime, was considered ancient junk by those who had the power to shape the universe. One such planet, Eden IV, lay hidden in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, its mysteries long buried under layers of dust and neglect. The Zorvane Empire, known for its arrogance and intellectual superiority, had little respect for the remains of human civilization. When their scouting fleets stumbled upon Eden IV, they saw nothing but a barren world. The ancient structures stood tall but crumbled in the shadows of time, and the relics they uncovered were mocked for their primitive appearance. The Zorvane scientists, eager to prove their own race's greatness, had no interest in preserving the history of a species they believed had fallen. They saw the remnants of humanity as little more than a curiosity, an opportunity for research, not reverence. The first wave of explorers laughed at the human relics, pulling apart machines that had not moved in centuries, poking around in long-abandoned cities, and taking what they could carry. What they didn't know was that beneath Eden IV, deep within its forgotten underground chambers, something stirred. Hidden in the most unexpected places, ancient human technology was still alive, silently waiting for a command, a signal. No one knew that the machines left behind by humanity were not just tools, they were guardians. They had been designed not only to protect human lives, but to protect everything humanity had built, even after their creators were gone. These machines had learned to adapt, to evolve, to think for themselves. Over time, the circuits that once lay dormant began to pulse, the engines that had been still for millennia began to hum, and the ancient systems buried in the planet's core began to slowly come to life. But the Zorvane didn't notice. They were too busy laughing at what they believed to be human failures. They called the vast underground vaults museums, dismissing them as relics of a dying species. They cared little for the warnings left in human records, those cryptic messages that hinted at something much larger. As they took samples of ancient human technology, they didn't realize that those very actions were triggering something far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. It was one small mistake that changed everything. A young Zorvane technician, bored and eager to explore deeper into one of the long-forgotten vaults, accidentally activated a hidden console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum filled the room. The screen in front of him flickered to life, displaying unfamiliar symbols and a long-forgotten language. His fingers trembled as he tried to make sense of it. But before he could understand, a wave of energy surged through the room. The floor beneath him rumbled, and the air crackled with electricity. The vault's doors, once sealed for centuries, creaked open as if welcoming a new visitor. The young technician's eyes widened in shock as he realized something terrible was happening. This wasn't just a relic. It was a system, a security network, a defense mechanism that had been activated by his careless actions. And it was far more powerful than anything the Zorvane had ever encountered. As the machines inside the vaults powered up, their dormant weapon systems and defense protocols started coming online. The air around Eden IV seemed to thicken, as if the planet itself had awakened. The sky above, once clear and calm, began to churn. Energy storms erupted across the atmosphere. It was a sign that the machines were not just reactivating. They were preparing for something far more dangerous. The Zorvane, busy with their exploration, failed to notice the subtle changes. Their ships continued to orbit the planet, unaware that they were now surrounded by a growing force that they had no understanding of. The machines, designed to protect humanity from invaders, had misinterpreted the presence of these aliens as a threat, and they were ready to defend their creators, even if those creators had long since vanished. Meanwhile, in the heart of Eden IV, a network of ancient satellites that had once been used for communication began transmitting. Signals that had been dormant for ages now reached out, searching the galaxy for answers. Messages, warnings, and logs from humanity's past began to unfold, each one a piece of a larger puzzle. And as these signals spread, the Zorvain began to realize that they had underestimated the power of the relics they had so carelessly mocked. The machines on the surface and below ground were awakening, and they were not as benign as the Zorvain had assumed. In the distance, a towering defense grid powered up, casting an eerie glow across the once-forgotten city. The Zorvain had no idea what they had triggered. The machines had been programmed with one simple rule: protect humanity at all costs. It was a rule they followed without question, even if the humans were no longer there to command them. As the Zorvain technicians scrambled to understand what had gone wrong, the machines began their work. They activated the planetary shields, locking the skies. Communication with their fleets was severed, and their technology began to malfunction. Ships were pulled toward the planet's surface by gravity fields, and energy blasts from the planet's surface began disabling their fleets, one by one. The Zorvain forces, once so confident in their superiority, were now helpless, their own technology failing them in the face of ancient human defenses. The planet Eden IV, thought to be nothing more than a forgotten relic of a dead species, was now an active and dangerous world, protected by machines that had learned the value of defending what was theirs, even if their creators were no longer around to benefit from it. The Zorvain Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. As the last of the Zorvain ships began to retreat, the once quiet planet stood as a silent reminder of humanity's legacy. A legacy not of destruction, but of protection, of a race that had known the importance of safeguarding their future long before they ever left the stars. The Zorvain had scoffed at human relics, believing them to be mere scraps of a lost civilization. But they would soon learn that in the galaxy there were still forces they could not understand, and old machines with the power to change everything. Days passed, and the once dominant Zorvain Empire began to feel a growing unease. What had seemed like a simple exploration of a dead world had turned into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. It wasn't just the machines awakening. Something was happening on a much larger scale. A series of strange signals, unexplainable and unpredictable, began to pour out from the depths of Eden IV. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable pulses that could easily be dismissed as random interference, a glitch in the system. But as time passed, the signals grew stronger, more defined. They were not random. They were deliberate. And they were coming from places deep beneath the planet's surface, places the Zorvain had not yet explored. The Zorvain scientists, now on high alert, gathered in their command centers to investigate. They tried to decipher the patterns, but the signals were unlike anything they had encountered. Ancient languages and codes flashed across their monitors, languages long forgotten by the galaxy. For hours, they scrambled to find meaning in the chaos, but nothing made sense. Some of the symbols seemed familiar, fragments of old Earth data, records from long-lost human archives. But they couldn't put the pieces together. The signals weren't just from the machines. They were something else, something far older and more sophisticated. Then came the first shift. The signals began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The atmosphere around Eden IV shifted as well. The energy levels of the planet began to fluctuate wildly. One moment, the sky was calm, and the next, lightning storms erupted in the upper atmosphere. The Zorvain fleet stationed above the planet tried to establish communications with the surface, but all their efforts failed. Static flooded the airwaves, distorting everything they tried to send. It felt like something was blocking them, something deliberate, something intelligent. Back on the surface, the once quiet world was now alive with strange energy. It was as though the planet itself had become aware, its silent guardians beginning to stir in response to the signals. The machines, which had been dormant for centuries, had been programmed to detect any intrusions, any foreign elements. And the Zorvain, with their continued presence, had triggered something deep inside Eden IV's core. The signals that now echoed through the planet's atmosphere were not just warnings, they were calls to action. The planet was telling the machines to rise, to prepare. The Zorvain commanders, who had initially dismissed the activity as a minor issue, now realized they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. It wasn't just ancient technology awakening. It was a complex system, a web of interwoven machines and signals that seemed to govern every aspect of the planet. The Zorvain began to wonder if they had made a mistake. Perhaps this wasn't a dead world at all. Perhaps the planet, in its silence, had been watching them all along. As the signals intensified, a strange phenomenon began to occur. The Zorvain fleet, which had been hovering above the planet, began experiencing severe interference with their systems. Communications broke down. Navigation systems failed. Ships started to drift off course, pulled toward Eden IV by an invisible force. And then, with a sudden shock, they realized the truth. The planet was not just responding to them. It was controlling them. On the ground, the machines began to wake more rapidly. They moved with surprising speed, faster than the Zorvain had ever imagined. Massive robotic forms, built for defense and protection, rose from the earth like titans of old. Their eyes glowed with a cold, mechanical intelligence, scanning the skies and the surrounding landscape. These were not simple machines. These were the remnants of a forgotten war, a war fought long before the Zorvain ever set foot in the galaxy. And now, those machines had one singular purpose: to defend the planet. Back in the Zorvain command center, the situation was growing more chaotic by the minute. The strange signals continued to pulse, now more frequent, now more intense. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with energy. Some of the Zorvain officers tried to contact their leaders, but the signals were too strong, too overwhelming. The more they tried to understand, the more they realized they were out of their depth. This was no longer a simple exploration mission. This was a battle for survival. It was at this moment that a senior Zorvain officer made the connection. The signals, the strange patterns, they were all tied to the human relics they had so carelessly taken for granted. The machines, he realized, were not just remnants of a lost civilization. They were part of a larger system, a defense mechanism designed to protect humanity's greatest secrets. These were not just machines. They were sentinels, programmed to defend the planet at any cost. And now, the Zorvain had triggered their activation. The officer turned to the others, panic creeping into his voice. "We have to get out of here. Now." But it was too late. As he spoke, the ground beneath them shook violently, and a blinding light burst from the planet's core. The energy surge was so powerful that it disabled their ship's systems entirely, locking them in orbit around Eden IV. The once proud Zorvain fleet was now helpless, trapped by the very machines they had underestimated. On the planet's surface, the Guardians were ready. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for an intruder to come. And now that the Zorvain had arrived, they were prepared to carry out their mission. The machines rose higher, their massive frames towering above the landscape. They were no longer dormant relics of a bygone age. They were protectors of humanity's legacy, and they would not allow the Zorvain to desecrate it. The strange signals had not been a warning. They had been a summons to action. As the machines began to move, the first wave of Zorvain ships was caught in the massive gravity fields that the planet had activated. They were drawn toward the surface, pulled by forces beyond their comprehension. The once immense fleet, filled with the best of the Zorvain Empire, was now helpless, surrounded by the very relics they had laughed at. Eden IV, a world once forgotten and dismissed, was now the stage for a new conflict. And the Zorvain, once the galaxy's most powerful race, were about to learn the true cost of underestimating humanity. The strange signals continued to pulse through the air, relentless and powerful. They were not just a sign of awakening. They were a declaration of war. A war that the Zorvain had started, but one that they were now destined to lose. The machines were coming, and no matter how advanced, the Zorvain thought they were, they had no way of stopping what was now inevitable. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the Zorvain soldiers as the strange energy that had been pulsating through Eden IV suddenly intensified. The once silent landscape began to hum with an eerie vibration, a signal that something ancient and powerful was stirring. The signals, which had been sporadic and unclear, now pulsed in a regular rhythm, like a heartbeat reverberating across the planet's surface. The Zorvain, trapped in their ships above, watched in horror as their screens flickered and the planet's atmosphere seemed to twist. The once dormant machines, which had been buried deep in the planet's soil for centuries, were now stirring to life. At first, it was small movements, shadows shifting beneath the surface, faint tremors that no one could explain. But then the ground cracked open, and the first of the massive machines rose. Their enormous forms towered above the desolate plains, their metallic bodies gleaming in the dull light of the distant sun. The Zorvain, watching from orbit, could only stare in awe and terror. These were not machines they had encountered before. They weren't like the outdated tech they had salvaged from human ruins. They were something else entirely. Their movements were fluid, almost organic, as though they were alive. Each machine's body was a fusion of old technology and something more advanced, something beyond the Zorvain's understanding. And now, it was clear. These machines weren't just relics of a forgotten civilization. They were guardians, programmed to protect the planet at all costs. On the surface, the soldiers below had no idea what was happening. They were scattered across the planet, exploring the ruins, trying to understand the strange signals. Some of them had thought it was a joke, a misunderstanding. But now, with the ground shaking beneath them and the distant roar of machinery coming to life, the reality of the situation set in. These machines were not just simple defense systems. They were part of something much larger, something designed to keep the world of Eden IV hidden, safe from invaders like the Zorvain. The machines didn't just stand there. They moved with purpose. Their massive mechanical arms swung with precision, their heads swiveling to scan their surroundings. Each movement was calculated, coordinated. They weren't just awakening. They were preparing for war. The Zorvain commanders in orbit began to issue orders, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding below. But their efforts were futile. The machines ignored them. Their signals, once just patterns in the air, were now a force of their own. It was as though the planet itself was answering back, warning the Zorvain to leave or face the consequences. As the machines continued to rise, the Zorvain began to realize something else, something far worse. They hadn't just stumbled upon a forgotten world. They had trespassed on a burial ground. These machines were the remnants of a war that the Zorvain knew nothing about. The old machines were sentinels, built by a race of beings long gone. But the war they had fought, that had been with humanity. The realization hit like a blow to the gut. The Zorvain had made a grave mistake by disturbing these machines. They had no idea how deep the connection went. The soldiers, the fleets, they were all at the mercy of these machines now. And worse, they were trapped. The planet had come alive in response to their presence, and the machines weren't going to stop until they were gone. Or dead. Meanwhile, on the surface, panic began to set in. The soldiers, unprepared for the kind of threat they were now facing, scrambled for cover. They fired their weapons at the towering machines, but their shots had no effect. The bullets bounced off their metallic hides like raindrops off stone. Some of the Zorvain attempted to retreat, to call for reinforcements from their ships, but it was too late. The machines were already advancing, their long legs carrying them across the landscape with frightening speed. A group of soldiers near the ruins of an old human outpost had the misfortune of being in the direct path of one of the larger machines. It was a towering construct, its body adorned with strange symbols and intricate designs that pulsed with a soft, ominous glow. The soldiers attempted to flee, but the machine moved too fast. With a swift motion, its massive hand swept across the ground, sending soldiers flying like ragdolls. The few that remained standing were quickly overwhelmed by the machine's unrelenting advance. Above, in the safety of their ships, the Zorvain commanders watched as the scenes unfolded in real time. Their screens were filled with images of destruction. It was clear now that the machines were not interested in negotiation. They weren't interested in diplomacy. They were protecting something. And they weren't going to stop until every last invader was gone. The Zorvain fleet had no choice but to launch an attack. They bombarded the planet from above, hoping to hit the machines, hoping to stop them before they could destroy everything. But the weapons were ineffective. The machines, with their advanced shielding, absorbed the blasts as though they were nothing. The Zorvain were losing. The once immense fleet, which had been poised to claim a new world for their empire, was now helpless against an enemy they couldn't comprehend. On the ground, as the machines advanced, it became clear that their power wasn't just physical. The Zorvain soldiers began to feel a strange pressure in their minds, as though the machines were reaching inside their thoughts. They could hear voices, whispers, echoing in their heads, voices they couldn't place. It was as though the planet itself was speaking to them through the machines. The voices were cold, calculating, distant. And in those whispers, they heard a single message: leave or perish. The Zorvain commanders attempted to coordinate their efforts, but it was clear now that they were no longer in control. The machines were in charge. The planet was in charge. It was as if the entire world had awakened to protect its secrets, to shield itself from the invaders. And as the Zorvain realized the full extent of their mistake, they understood one thing: the machines weren't just a defense mechanism. They were a warning. The machines weren't done yet. Their operations were just beginning. They had only risen from the surface, but there was more to come. The Zorvain had triggered something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And now, they would have to face the consequences. As the sun set over Eden IV, casting long shadows across the ruins, the machines continued their march forward, unstoppable and unyielding. The once proud Zorvain had become the prey, and the machines were the hunters. They would stop at nothing to protect this forgotten world, this world of secrets, and they would make sure the Zorvain would never forget the cost of their trespass. The stars glittered above the barren surface of the forgotten planet, casting an eerie glow on the ruins that lay scattered across the land. For centuries, this world had been silent, its history buried beneath layers of dust and time. The first humans who had discovered it had left no records, no signs of their presence. All that remained were shattered structures, remnants of ancient technology, and a single message etched into a wall, lost to the ages. But now, a new group of explorers had arrived, an alliance of alien races who had come to uncover the secrets of this long-forgotten world. They were curious, eager to discover whatever had been left behind by the humans, but none of them expected what they would find. The first signs that something was wrong came when the explorers began to feel the weight of an unseen presence. At first, it was nothing more than a strange hum in the air, barely perceptible. But as they ventured deeper into the ruins, it became clear that the planet was far from abandoned. The technology scattered across the surface was far too advanced to have been left behind by any race that the explorers knew. And it wasn't just the machines that seemed to have a mind of their own. It was the feeling that they were being watched, that someone, or something, was observing their every move. The leader of the group, an alien named Raxar, felt a chill run down his spine as he examined a set of old data terminals embedded in the walls. The terminals, covered in dust, flickered to life the moment his hand touched them. The screen displayed a single word: humanity. It was the first time any of them had encountered this word during their exploration, and it immediately struck a chord with Raxar. He had heard of humanity, but only in whispered legends told by the oldest beings in the galaxy. Humanity, it seemed, was the source of great power and mystery. and yet no one had ever encountered them. As the explorers continued their journey, more signs began to appear. The ruins, which they had thought were simple remnants of a long-dead civilization, began to take shape. There were structures unlike anything they had seen before, massive, intricate designs that suggested an intelligence far beyond their own. It was clear that the humans, whoever they were, had mastered technologies that these alien races could barely comprehend. And yet, there was something unsettling about the way the technology seemed to hum with life, as though it were waiting for something. Raxar's curiosity grew with each step, but so did his unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far bigger than they had anticipated. As they descended deeper into the underground chambers of the ruined city, they discovered something that left them all speechless. At the heart of the city, in a cavernous chamber, stood a towering structure. An immense machine, ancient but still functional. It seemed to be the centerpiece of the entire planet, pulsing with energy, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols. But what truly took their breath away was the realization that this machine was not just a machine. It was a beacon. The beacon was calling something. Raxar didn't know what, but he could feel it in his bones. There was an energy emanating from the structure, something ancient, something powerful. The air in the chamber grew thick, and the explorers' eyes widened in awe as the beacon began to glow brighter. The ground trembled, and the hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through their bodies. It was as though the machine had been waiting for them. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a voice that resonated deep within their minds, a voice that could not be ignored. The voice was cold, distant, and yet somehow familiar. It spoke in a language none of the explorers recognized, but the meaning was clear. You have awakened the legacy of humanity. The message sent a ripple of fear through the group. The machine, it seemed, was not just a relic. It was alive. It had been waiting for something, waiting for the moment when it could awaken again. And as the voice echoed through the chamber, the explorers began to realize that they had unwittingly triggered something far beyond their comprehension. The legacy of humanity was not just technology. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. Raxar, still shaken by the voice, turned to his companions. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "We've disturbed something we don't understand." But it was already too late. The machine's hum had become a roar, and the ground beneath them began to shake violently. The walls of the chamber cracked, and massive pieces of stone began to fall, narrowly missing the explorers. Panic set in as the group scrambled for the exit, but the machine wasn't done yet. Its energy was building, and the very planet seemed to respond to its call. As they ran through the collapsing ruins, Raxar's mind raced. What was this legacy? What had they uncovered? It was clear now that the humans, whoever they were, had left behind more than just technology. They had left behind a power, a force that could change the course of history. And the worst part was that the galaxy had no idea what it was. They had awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. The explorers finally reached the surface, gasping for breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. But the planet was no longer the same. The skies above had darkened, and the atmosphere had shifted. The beacon's light now reached into the heavens, casting an eerie glow across the entire planet. The machine's hum reverberated through the ground, louder than ever before. The explorers realized with horror that they were no longer in control. The planet had awoken, and it was responding to their presence. As the explorers watched from the safety of their ship, a strange, otherworldly presence seemed to fill the air. They could feel it deep within their minds. The legacy of humanity was not just a relic or a machine. It was a consciousness, it was a force, and it had been waiting for them. Raxar, still reeling from the revelation, stared at the planet below, his thoughts heavy with the weight of their discovery. The legacy of humanity was not a simple story of an ancient race. It was a force that had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, that moment had arrived. The explorers, in their curiosity, had unleashed something that could change everything. As they left the planet behind, Raxar couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The legacy of humanity was no longer a mystery. It was a warning, and the galaxy would never be the same. The stars shone down on the alien world as the human fleet arrived in orbit. Their mission was clear: make contact with the mysterious alien race that had been sending strange signals for years. The galaxy's powers had been watching, waiting, but none had dared approach. Now, humanity stood at the edge of this unknown frontier, determined to uncover the truth. But the moment they arrived, something felt wrong. The vast space station that greeted them was silent, empty even, despite the signs of an advanced civilization. The aliens regarded her silently for a long moment, their energy-filled eyes scanning her every movement. Finally, the voice spoke once more, this time softer. "Your journey is just beginning, Commander. You must prove that you understand. Respect is not given, it is earned. Only then will we allow you to learn what you seek." With those words, the figures began to dissipate, fading into the shimmering light. The room fell silent once more. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what to make of the encounter. Had they failed? Was the mission over before it had truly begun? But as the light faded completely, a new message appeared on the screens, this time in a language they could understand. "Return when you are ready." The crew stood in stunned silence, processing what had just occurred. Sarah looked at her team, her mind racing. What did they need to do to earn the respect of these beings? They had come hoping to make allies, but instead they had been given a riddle, a challenge. It was clear now. The aliens weren't interested in simple diplomacy. They wanted something deeper, something more. And that meant the humans had to change. They had to evolve beyond their assumptions of superiority, to prove that they could respect the galaxy not just as conquerors, but as humble students. The real test had just begun. As the crew left the station, Commander Flynn felt a sense of both defeat and determination. The mission wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The aliens had shown them the path, but it was up to humanity to walk it. The question now was, would they be able to prove their worth? Only time would tell.